What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again with the Stokastic DFS channel. And today, we're talking college football DFS ahead of the Week 13 Saturday main slate. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. We're also brought to you today by Prize Picks. If you've never heard of Prize Picks, they're a site where you're making lineups with player props. It's overs, unders, passing yards, touchdowns, receptions, everything you can think of. And it's not just college football. There's NFL, NBA, NHL. You can mix and match those sports across your lineups. And if you click the link in the video description below, you will get a first match deposit bonus up to $100 and one free month of Stokastic Plus Platinum. So make sure to check them out. And we are recording this early before Thanksgiving. Happy holidays, by the way. So this is a first look. I have not finished with projections. I have not dug into all the injury situations. So if I miss something, leave a comment. Let me know. But that is why it's a very early recording for me, just trying to jam it all in. So let's do this. We'll make it quick. First game on the Saturday main slate, we've got Auburn taking on Alabama. 22-point spread in favor of the Crimson Tide. 49.5 total here. Auburn, 84th in pace, 42% pass rate. Robbie Ashford's the signal caller. He's mobile, 589 yards on the ground for him this year. And he hasn't started the whole year either. TJ Finley started out as the starter. Very inept passer, just averaging 140 yards per game on about 20 and a half attempts. Somewhat depressed just because of the timeshare to start the year, but he does everything on the ground. He's somewhat affordable, but it's going to be a tough matchup, and Auburn has a minuscule team total. These aren't the spots I like to target Robbie Ashford. Generally, you want him when he's a favorite or close to it. Tough spot here. The backfield, unfortunately, their best offensive players are Tank Bigsby and Jarquez Hunter, and they don't play at the same time, so they're both dealing with limited opportunities. Bigsby averages 18.4 touches per game. Jarquez Hunter, 10.3. There's maybe a conversation to play Bigsby as a GPP option just because the volume's decent. Really just efficiency with him, but it's been a mess for Auburn all year. Probably not playing anyone on the team. If you do play receiver, again, I would not recommend this, but if you do come down to it, I'll give you the routes here quick. We won't do this for every team in the interest of time, but it's a Coy Moore, 76%, Shedrick Jackson, 76%. I mean, you're better off just playing other guys. This team sucks. Alabama, they have a pretty good team total here, 36 points. They're 52nd in pace, a 52% pass rate. Bryce Young is expensive, and he doesn't run really. 147 yards on the ground this year. Most of that came on one carry. Shocking, I know, it's the week 13, but yeah, most of that did come on one carry. He's been playing hurt all year. He averages 266 as a passer, 33 attempts. His receivers aren't very good, so it's very tough to play Bryce Young at this price outside of just like GPP stacks. The backfield, Jahmyr Gibbs is hurt. Trey Sanders entered the transfer portal. It's some combination of Jason McClellan and Roydell Williams if Jahmyr Gibbs misses. And again, Alabama's playing for nothing, so start expecting some of their players to opt out. This might be their last home game, so I don't think a lot of them do it here. But, I mean, this team's stone dead for anything postseason-wise. A lot of their players are NFL guys. They're not going to play in the bowl game. So, I mean, does Jahmyr Gibbs rush back for this game? He allegedly returned to practice, so this is something to watch. He's playable if he's active. He's the team's second most targeted receiver. In the pass game, this has been tricky all year. They've been playing awful receivers like Jermaine Burton, but maybe it's condensed a little bit. Last week, they played a non-con game, so it's very difficult to evaluate. And the routes were all over the place. Let's go to the week before. In the week before, Ja'Cory Brooks had a 79% route rate, and Jermaine Burton was still at 54%. Cam Latouche injured, but he was at 90% the week before. If he plays, he's locked in. And outside of that, it's just basically a rotation like Trayshawn Holden, Isaiah Bond. These guys are all over the place. JoJo Earl, Kendrick Law, they all play. It's basically Ja'Cory Brooks. Otherwise, you're throwing darts. Ja'Cory Brooks and Latouche, assuming he's active. Actually, a very tough pass game to target here. Very little consistency all year, and that's why they have 2 losses and they're playing for nothing. Second game, it's Utah taking on Colorado. 30-point spread, 52.5 total. As Washington showed us last week, you're going to have to balance this. Starters are going to sit the second half against Colorado a lot of the time. And Utah is 108th in pace, 45% pass rate. Cam Rising coming off one of the worst games of his career, but he's very mobile. 378 yards on the ground for him this year. He's averaging 238 as a passer. He's very expensive. And, you see the 41.25 implied team total. It gives Rising some interest, but he's been playing injured, and he's also leaving after this year. They do have an outside chance of winning the Pac-12, or I guess I should say getting to the Pac-12 championship. So they got to play this game, and they need to win it. So this is an important game. It's not all for nothing yet for Utah. So Rising, I think, is an interesting GPP play because of his legs. The backfield, they've been missing a lot of guys. Bernard got banged up a couple of weeks ago. He's been in a limited role since. Jalen Glover didn't play last week. They haven't really been using Jaquindon Jackson either. They kind of just have given the keys back to Tavion Thomas. He was in the doghouse for much of the year, but over the last 2 weeks, he's touched the ball 23 and 20 times. So Tavion Thomas is kind of interesting because Colorado, they're one of the worst defenses in the country. He should carry the ball 20 times here. Receiving game, everything is going through Kincaid and Vele. Kincaid had 16 targets last week. He's averaging 75 yards per game. Vele comes in at 53.5. Kincaid at the same price. I think he's just a straight up better play. And then the rest of the routes, you're probably not targeting anyone on Utah. And I'm not going to read the routes for this team. They rotate pretty much regardless. Money Parks would be the guy I get to outside of this. Maybe a Contrarian, Solomon Enos, or Dixon. Colorado, X this team out and don't think twice. Think the only guy you maybe get to is a Contrarian RJ Sneed or a Lamonius Craig. But very simple here. You should not play Colorado. Michigan State, Penn State. This game has a 52.5 total, 18.5 point spread in favor of the Nittany Lions. Michigan State is pretty fast. They're 33rd in pace. They have a 53% pass rate. But Peyton Thorne's been pretty bad this year. Just 63 yards on the ground for Peyton Thorne. He averages 223 yards through the air per game on 31.5 attempts. Penn State's strength of their team is their secondary. So this is a challenge here for Peyton Thorne. Their team total is also 17, so it's not ideal, but he has some contrarian, appeal at 6,400. The backfield is interesting. I believe Jarek Broussard got banged up, so we saw Elijah Collins and Berger handle most of the work. This is going to be a three-way committee if everyone's healthy, so the best way to target this is if Broussard is out. And even in that instance, you're still dealing with a committee between Berger and Collins against this strong Penn State defense. In the receiving game, it's pretty condensed here. It's mostly Kean Coleman and Jaden Reed. They had 8 and 9 targets apiece. Reed actually had 9, and Coleman had the big game. Coleman leads the team in receiving with 707 yards this year. Reed's at 600. Reed did miss some time, but even on a per-game basis, Coleman's been ahead of Reed. So, I've been basically trying to get the Reed buy low spot, and it just hasn't happened. Kean Coleman's been fantastic. Mosley has been the wide receiver 3 for the most part, and they split tight end between Barker, Malik Carr, kind of a mess behind them. Penn State, 62nd in pace. They have a 48.5% pass rate. Sean Clifford, he's just going to cede time to Drew Allar moving down the stretch here. So Penn State really not playable at quarterback at this point unless you're hoping Sean Clifford gets 3 or 4 touchdowns before Allar comes in. Kind of rough. Backfield's a 50-50 committee. Half the time, Katron Allen has the big game. Half the time, it's Nick Singleton. Very little separates them in terms of opportunity. 13.9 touches per game for Katron Allen, and then 13.3 for Nick Singleton. They're firmly in the sort of low-volume, efficiency-based GPP range at their prices because they're heavy favorites. Receiving game, we saw Parker Washington get ruled out for the year, which should make Mitchell Tinsley and Keandre Lambert-Smith the top 2 guys here for this team. They use a lot of 12 personnel with Brenton Strange and Theo Johnson here, so that's something to watch. But this team does run the ball a ton when they're playing with a lead, which they project to do so here. Last week, Tinsley, 74% of the routes, Keandre Lambert-Smith, 76%, and then the tight ends rotated a lot here as well. So expect that to be the case. As far as price goes, Keandre Lambert-Smith is pretty interesting at his price. He's $4K flat, but not a ton of interest here. All right, going to our next game, Oregon State. So this one, we call this the Civil War. Yeah, weird name, but Oregon 3-point favorite, 59 total here. And there's a lot to dig into DFS-wise. Oregon's 76th in pace, 45.5% pass rate for them. Bo Nix is 9,700, just exceedingly expensive, and he's hurt. And not hurt enough to miss the game, but he's dealing with a sprained ankle. Barely ran at all in their last game, clearly affecting his mobility, which is a huge component of his game. If he's limited at all, he's just flat out overpriced here. He does have 509 rushing yards this year, averages 288 as a passer on 30.5 attempts. So he's pretty efficient, but unplayable at this price if he's not going to run. So watch him pregame, make sure he's moving around, look for reports throughout the week. It's going to be key. Backfield's basically a 50-50 committee now between Bucky Irving, Noah Whittington. They're not messing around with the Sean Dollars, Jordan Jameses of the world. And there's a lot on the line in this game. Oregon needs to win. There's a lot of noise kind of in the Pac-12 title picture outside of USC right now. There's a lot of teams alive, and they have a chance to get there, so they need to win this game. Expect a 50-50 committee between Bucky and Whittington, maybe slightly Bucky's direction. And then in the receiving game, still no Chase Cota for them. He's the wide receiver 2 when healthy. It's basically just Troy Franklin and Chris Hudson. They're the top 2. Franklin easily the 1. Hudson's now 5,500, pretty expensive. But if you're looking to stack him, I think he does make some sense. Deontay Thornton has been the wide receiver 3 with the absence of Chase Cota. So just a name to mention. I don't think too viable here. His route rate was 89%, which is solid. But again, they're just going to use Cota and Franklin ahead of them. Both their route rates were north of 90%. Tight ends of rotation, just a mess. Oregon State, 125th in pace, 40% pass rate. Ben Gobranson's a game manager. He has 30 rushing yards, averages 151 passing yards. Some of that because he split time with Chance Nolan in some games where Nolan got injured, but we're still talking about a pretty low volume offense overall. They would need to be like getting crushed, I think, for Goldbranson to be coaxed into a voluminous role. Damian Martinez has handled a bell cow workload, and this dude's viable regardless of opponent. Unfortunately, Oregon is a little stronger up front, but Damian Martinez has now touched the ball over 20 times in 4 straight games. Deshaun Fenwick's hurt. Jameis Griffin got hurt in the last game. Jack Coletto didn't play. They're just running out of bodies here. And regardless, I don't think it matters. Martinez has been just straight up electric in his time on the field. This offensive line is really good. I'm not really too concerned about game script here. They're only slight underdogs. So Martinez is one of the better running back plays on this slate for price-adjusted options. Certainly there's some other guys with more ceiling, but he's very live. Receiving game, it's a low-volume passing attack, so you're going to have to deal with the ebbs and the flows. Trayshawn Harrison's just flat out too expensive for this role. He averages 5.5 targets per game in the last 4. A bit ridiculous. And then Anthony Gold missed their last game. So without him, we saw route rates pop up for Silas Bolden, 77%. And then Tyjon Lindsley, 68%. Tight end Jack Veiling, 74%. That was a season high for him. They haven't had Luke Musgrave in a while. And then it had been a share with him and Jack Overman. Overman didn't see a target. Unsure on the routes with Overman, but there's a chance he didn't play. Again, I'm very early into my prep recording this video, so maybe watch that. But regardless, Silas Bolden's a better play than Veiling if Gold is out. Minnesota takes on Wisconsin. A game we should probably just X out outside of the running backs. 36 total, 3-point spread in favor of Wisconsin. The favorite, Wisconsin, has an implied team total of 19.5, so very bad. No quarterbacks are in play here. It's Mo Ibrahim. He has a ridiculous workload. He now has touch counts of 37, 32, 36, and 40 in the last 2 games. Obviously averaging 153 yards. He's going to win awards for slamming into the back of his offensive line 40 times a game, even though there are more deserving running backs that just have more slight workloads. But Ibrahim's in play for DFS just because of his workload. If he carries 35 times, he's going to get 100 yards. There's just no ifs, ands about it. For the Wisconsin side, unfortunately, the only play who's viable, Braylon Allen, got hurt last game. And I don't even know if that matters because they insist on using the committee regardless. So Ches Malusi carried 21 times. Isaac Rendo carried 9. If we think Braylon misses this game, which he may, again, there's nothing to play for Wisconsin. There's a lot of transfer rumors about Braylon too. So watch his status closely. I'm not interested in the Wisconsin backfield too much. But if Braylon's out, I would have a lot of interest in Ches Malusi as a favorite here, who's going to carry 20 times. Malusi has some interest regardless. Last week, they ran the ball so much that Ches Malusi finished with 21 carries. Braylon had 18, and Guerrero still had 9. So there's a lot of work to go around. Receivers a position to X out. Purdue takes on Indiana. 54 total here. Purdue, 10.5-point favorites. They have an awesome implied team total. They're 55th in pace. They have a 58% pass rate. On the other side, Indiana's first in pace. They have a 58.5% pass rate. O'Connell's finally in a bounce back spot. Played in a really windy game and some tough matchups lately. That's caused his passing yardage to drop down to 283 per game on 42.3 attempts. He was over 300 at the midpoint of the year. So in good games, he's going to backdoor his way to 300 yards. In tough games, windy games, he's going to fall short. And this is the kind of spot where we can play him in GPPs. I wish the price had fallen more. 6,700 is still a decent price for him. And you can stack him. I mean, Charlie Jones, 29.7% target share, averages 96 yards per game. He's fine. Payne Durham and TJ Sheffield are really the guys I look to stack with him if I'm going that direction. It's generally all flowing through Charlie Jones, and the rest is just GPP volatility. Durham, he had a 79% route rate last week. Sheffield was at 64. The next highest was 35, so it's basically those three are pass. The backfield's very difficult to evaluate. Devin Maccabee got hurt in their last game. King Doru hasn't played in three games. So that left Dylan Downing to carry 18 times. Very interesting. They still split work with him and Kobe Lewis. Kobe Lewis had 14 touches himself. Their favor. This is a pretty good spot to just play some GPP roulette with these two and save some salary. There's actually some decent cheap backs. You don't feel great about it. They're not locked in, but Downing and Kobe Lewis could have pretty good roles here against Indiana. That's assuming Maccabee sits. We'll wait and see on his status. Indiana, 21.7 implied team total as the 10.5 point underdogs. They started Dexter Williams last week. He's very different than Basilic, and he changed their offense entirely. They went full run, and it completely changed the complexion of their offense. So Dexter Williams does have 156 rush yards on the year now, most of that coming last week. He had 10 design attempts. They also gave 13 to Shevers, 12 to Henderson, 3 to Lucas. The running backs aren't targetable, but there's a contrarian appeal for Dexter Williams. He's a really cheap guy. They only had 6 targets last week, so 2 of them went to Henderson too. I mean, I don't know what to say about Indiana's pass game. Look at this. You can't play any of them if Williams starts. What a mess. Georgia Tech, Georgia, 36-point spread in favor of the Bulldogs, 48.5 total here. Georgia Tech, unplayable. Jeff Sims quit the team, or so it seems. He had a chance to go into their second most recent game and decided not to. They had Zach Pyron get injured. They're going to play 2 quarterbacks likely between Gibson and Fomashon. I don't know who it is, and I don't want to play them regardless. You're not playing anyone on Georgia Tech. There's not even any point to talk about the runners or the pass catchers. Georgia, they're 111th in pace, but they have a 48.4% pass rate. Stetson Bennett, somewhat mobile, 169 yards on the ground this year, averaged 274 as a passer and 31.5 attempts. Stetson Bennett is a decent GPP play across the board. Their implied team total is 42. Georgia Tech's is 6. So that's why you're Xing out Georgia Tech more than anything else. They have a 6-point implied team total. They're not even projected to score a touchdown. Anyway, Stetson does have GPP appeal because we've seen him rack up big touchdown games. If you are stacking him, it's Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers. Their prices continue to fall. And we're probably going to get a good spot on them for the SEC championship because their prices probably fall again next week after they're playing limited snaps and routes as they've done through most of the year. When they are in competitive games, they'll get up to like 90% of the routes. That just doesn't project to be the case here. Even last week, McConkey Bowers, 95% of the routes. Darnell Washington, 48. Kenny McIntosh, 48. Marcus Rosemy-Jackson, 52. Kearis Jackson, he didn't get a target, so I don't have his routes. You have to be targeted to pop up in the route tree. Dylan Bell, 52. Dominic Blaylock, 43. It's pretty spread outside Brock and McConkey. Maybe a contrarian Marcus Rosemy, but ideally no. In the run game, it's going to be a timeshare. It was narrowed a little bit. Kenny McIntosh, 19 carries. Dawan Edwards, 13. Kendall Milton, 6. Milton seems to have been phased out a little bit. He dealt with an injury midseason, so he's working his way back, but it's mostly Edwards and McIntosh in the backfield. They're just not really priced to play, but McIntosh, if he got 19 carries and another 2 targets in the pass game, he would be GPP worthy, but I think it's a little more spread just given the massive blowout. And I don't know if Robinson was hurt or not. Again, early in the week, haven't looked at snaps. He just did not see a carry, so not sure if he played or not. Michigan, Ohio State, 7.5-point spread in favor of Ohio State, 55.5 total. The game for real life for DFS, it is going to be very challenging because of injuries. Michigan slow, 123rd in pace, 38.5% pass rate. JJ McCarthy, really struggling lately. Not running a lot. He does have 213 rush yards, giving him some mobility, but they don't really use him that way. Averaging 177.5 per game as a passer. That's atrocious. He's too expensive at 6,900 unless he breaks a run or something. They just don't use him correctly for DFS at least. The backfield, Blake Corum got hurt. Donovan Edwards has been hurt. I don't know if they're going to play. If Corum plays, he's a contrarian play just because he's going to carry the ball over 20 times. He had 1 carry in the second half. He still finished with 19 carries. Blake Corum is a rock-solid GPP play at his price, just 7-point underdogs. We haven't seen him in a game environment like this all year, but if he's active, he's viable. And then Donovan Edwards, we haven't seen him fully healthy in a while. You're just going to have to wait and see. I mean, they're both viable if they're fully healthy. If they're not fully healthy, it's going to depend on who's active and whatnot for this game. CJ Stokes looks like the third back. So if they're both out, Stokes at 3.3K would be live. Receiving core, it is Ronnie Bell, 1, Cornelius Johnson, 2, Roman Wilson, 3. And then the tight end is Luke Schoonmaker when he's healthy, but he's hurt right now. We don't know if he's going to play. With him out, it's been Colston Loveland, who actually had 6 targets last week. It's kind of been a 1-for-1 replacement there. Nothing really to break down. I'm not trying to play a Michigan receiver unless it's like a run back to an Ohio State stack or something like that. Most interested in Ronnie Bell, Schoonmaker, and Cornelius Johnson if they're healthy. Some interest in Loveland if Schoonmaker is out. And one last thing, Isaiah Gash had 4 targets. He's a running back. And I don't believe Stokes had any. Yeah, he did not. So maybe this is a pass catcher specific, run game specific back platoon if Corum and Edwards are out, but we'll see. Ohio State, 99th in pace, 45% pass rate. This team is just really explosive, so their lacking offensive environment doesn't really affect them too much. Stroud, not very mobile, 77 rush yards. They do average 271.5 as a passer. He does at least, not they. Stroud himself, 271.5 as a passer in 28 attempts. It's a little bit down from last year, but still very efficient and clear upside as a passer here. The guy I'll continue to stack. The backfield, it's just like Michigan. We have to see who plays. So when everyone's healthy, it's a timeshare between Mayan Williams and Trevion Henderson. Dallin Hayden may have worked himself into that timeshare. He carried 27 times last week. They also haven't had Chip Trayanum, who's not in the DraftKings player pool, but he was projected to be ahead of Hayden. That's probably not the case anymore. So it's going to depend on health. I would rank them 1 Henderson, 2 Williams, 3 Hayden in a vacuum, but depending on who's there will be how viable these guys are, which ones are viable, and we'll see. Receiving game, it's basically this 4 guys at the top and nobody else. Marvin Harrison's the 1, Ibuka's the 2. It's close between those guys, though. Harrison has 1,037 yards. Ibuka has 914. The 3 is Fleming. He's a pretty distant third, 415 yards for him. And then Cade Stover's the tight end. This is kind of like the tight end of Ohio State throughout the years. They pop up for big games generally on touchdown volume, but they don't really have the target floor that you'd like. And Stover is now 5.1K, so I'd rather play Fleming 1-for-1 in a vacuum. But these receivers are awesome plays. I'm trying to get to 1 in a lot of lineups. It's probably just going to be split between the 2 of them because they both have immense ceilings. South Carolina, Clemson. This game is a 14.5-point spread in favor of Clemson, 52 total. South Carolina, 89th in pace, 50% pass rate, coming off that monster game against Tennessee. Rattler, the game of his career, he's still been bad this year. 24 rush yards on the year, averaging 221 as a passer on 29 attempts. It's been bad. In the run game, they did not have Marshawn Lloyd or Christian Beal-Smith last week. We'll see if they play. But without them, Jaheim Bell had 18 carries, and he's been kind of in this role all year long. He's their tight end. He's now like a Swiss Army knife. Had 4 targets last week. They're going to use Jaheim Bell everywhere. He's still really cheap. So I have a lot of interest in Jaheim Bell if Marshawn Lloyd and Christian Beal-Smith miss again. Outside of that, Antwain Wells is the wide receiver 1. He had 14 targets last week. Averages 71 yards per game on 6.5 targets on the year. But when the chips are down, they'll throw to him. Everyone else is in a rotation. Brooks, Van, Stogner, the other tight end. Even Amari and Brown, Leggett. These guys all play, making South Carolina difficult to target. So it's Bell is the favorite play. Outside of that, pretty risky. Not a lot of interest in Rattler. He's probably going to be under more pressure than he was last week. Clemson's best asset on defense is their D-line. Clemson, 60th in pace, 45.5% pass rate. DJ Uiagalelei seems to have settled into a run-first game managerial role, and that is viable for DFS. He's actually going to continue to pop as one of the cheaper quarterbacks to target because of that rushing ability. His designed attempts the last 2 weeks are at 13 and 12. He is at risk of benching, but for DFS purposes, that doesn't really matter. If he's playing poorly enough to get benched, you weren't going to win a tournament if he stayed in the game the whole time anyway. We're playing him for his upside. So Uiagalelei in play for sure. As a passer, he averages 219 through the air on 30.5 attempts. Definitely leaves something to be desired. The backfield, it's Will Shipley handling about 70% of the work. Phil Maffa and Kobe Pace act as change of paces. It's a decent matchup. I mean, South Carolina does allow nearly 5 yards per rush attempt. So Shipley, he's not going to have, a Bijan Robinson workload, a Blake Corum workload, but he can get there efficiency-wise. So he's an excellent tournament play. And his price generally stays in check because his role is limited. In the receiving game, nobody averages more than 5 targets per game. Nobody averages more than 46.5 receiving yards per game. Both those numbers belong to freshman Antonio Williams, and they rotate about 17 receivers on the field as well. Nada. Davis Allen, who's a tight end. Bo Collins, when he's healthy, he missed last game. Jake Briningstool, Brandon Spector, EJ Williams, Adam Randall. I mean, they play a lot of guys. Tough spot to get to. Would be Williams or bust. West Virginia, Oklahoma State. 7.5 point spread in favor of Oklahoma State. 63 total. West Virginia, they're 56th in pace. Their pass rate is 51.5%, but they moved to Garrett Green at quarterback. They benched JT Daniels for good reason. He's awful. And Garrett Green has a very different skill set. Highly mobile, didn't display it too much last week, but does have 229 rush yards. Passing stats are difficult to look at because he's split time a lot with Daniels this year. But he actually projects decently well, 6,800 for him. Increase in price, don't love that. But Oklahoma State's defense is awful, so they're especially against the opposing rushing attack. So this could be a spot where he's targetable. The run game is basically out of the question outside of him. It's now a 3-way committee. CJ Donaldson's out for the year, but Tony Mathis, he's just been so bad that he's been benched. Then they use Jalen Anderson, Justin Johnson. They all play a little bit. And maybe there was a Mathis injury. Someone in the comments can correct. Again, very early in the week for me. I don't know this, but Tony Mathis was awful before the injury. Then he came back, carried 23 times inefficiently. Then he just had 4 carries last week. I don't know. I'm making assumptions not having looked, but I would not play Mathis. I think he's bad. And then the receiving game is definitely affected by the transition to Garrett Green. And the receiving game lost Caden Prather last week. I mean, we talked about this on Betting You, our betting podcast. I was speculating that Caden Prather is a transfer risk and a heavy one at that, and that he just didn't play last week. This could be injury related, but I mean, it's the time of year where teams that are playing for nothing, have players that were clearly underutilized, are going to transfer. And Caden Prather fits the bill. Former 4-star prospect, sacrificed a lot of really good offers to play for West Virginia and had his career not ruined, but underutilized by a dead man walking a coach. So I don't know if Prather is going to play. If he does, he's the top price-adjusted option in the offense. 7.3 targets per game over the last 3 games and 8 targets per game on the year. Trails only Bryce Ford Wheaton narrowly. But Sam James has played really well in the absence. He's leading the team in targets over the last 4 weeks. He now leads the team in receiving yards. He's been explosive, so Sam James is fine. Reese Smith is the guy that picks up the slack for Caden Prather. He's 3,500, and he would be viable if Prather is out again. I'm just going to pull the routes quickly. We haven't been pulling as many routes in the interest of time here, but I'm going to look this one up because it's interesting. No, you know what? He didn't play a lot. His routes were still at 56%. So Reese is not a very good option, I guess. Cortez Braham played more than him. Wow. All right. Never mind. So make sure you watch Live Before Lock. You're going to get more updated news for most of these teams. I have not looked at the routes for a lot of them yet. Oklahoma State, Spencer Sanders, very good dual threat when he's fully healthy, but right now you're gambling on that. He has 391 rush yards, averages 264 as a passer, and 37 attempts. And their receiving core looks like it's getting a little more condensed. Jaden Bray is out for the year. Stephen Johnson didn't play last week. So it was pretty narrow between Brennan Presley, Braden Johnson, Bryson Green, and John Paul Richardson. Didn't see any injuries between them, but I'm not sure. I'll look quickly here. because we're filming this very early in the week. But Dominic Richardson, the running back, didn't play. Unfortunately, that did not condense to anything whatsoever. So give me a second here while I pull up the injuries. Again, the woes of filming this on Wednesday. We don't know who's hurt yet. I have not done projections. This is very good live air, I'm sure. Whatever. Okay, it's not coming up. But, all right, got it finally. Jaden Bray out. Bryson Green looks like he got injured. Anyway, okay, so now we have 3 potential injuries. The top 3, number 1's Braden Johnson. He just hasn't been healthy this year. Brennan Presley's the 2. John Paul Richardson's the 3. Bryson Green's hurt. We don't know if he's going to play. Stephen Johnson's hurt. We don't know if he's going to play. That would be the order of them. And then from there would be like a Langston Anderson that pops up. But this is a decent stack. I mean, you're just banking on Sanders. Coastal Carolina, James Madison, 14-point spread in favor of James Madison, 54 total. Coastal's 120th in pace, 41% pass rate. Grayson McCall's hurt, so they're splitting quarterback reps between Jared Guest and Bryce Carpenter. Carpenter's the natural rusher, but you can't play any of these guys with the split. The backfield, it looks like it's a split between Reese White and CJ Beasley, too. CJ Beasley just 4 carries last game. I'm going to look on the injuries here, too. Doesn't look like anything. Yeah, he's not listed, but, DraftKings doesn't always do a good job listing. Look at Beasley's status. Make sure he's not hurt. He's the leader on the year when everyone's fully healthy, but this is a concerning workload. Ultimately, these guys are like pretty good GPP options because they run the ball so much, but James Madison plays good run defense. They only allow 2.7 yards per carry. The receiving game, Jared Brown looks like he's going to play. At least that's the word on the street. He's their electric freshman, averages 70 yards per game. Sam Pinckney's at 81.4. Concern for me with McCall gone, but these guys are interesting GPP options. Then in the receiving game, outside of them, Tyson Mobley's the 3, not too much interest. For James Madison, they're 90th in pace, 42% pass rate. Todd Centeo's the quarterback, very mobile, 368 yards, averages 266 as a passer. Coastal's defense doesn't scare you. They're giving up 8.4 yards per pass attempt. So that is something worth mentioning here. He's live, and he's probably going to be chalk at this price, honestly. This is a really good price on Todd Centeo. Honestly, really good price on all of the James Madison players. Maybe they go under run because they haven't been on a slate yet, but now that I'm finally seeing their prices, and holy smoke, this team is 14-point favorites over Coastal Carolina. Todd Centeo is 58. Percy Agayi Obesi, I don't know how to say his name. Excuse me, Percy. He's carrying the ball over 20 times per game in the last 4. He's at 5,400. Their receivers, Reggie Brown hasn't played in 2 games. I don't think he's going to play. Chris Thornton is at 62. He averages 8 targets per game, 92 yards per game. I'm going to pull up their routes because I don't know James Madison as well as some other teams. They haven't been on a slate yet this year. And I do know that Reggie Brown is hurt. I don't know if he's coming back. If he does, he'll play a lot. Anyway, if he's out, it's Chris Thornton is the 1. Devin Ravenel, he was the 2. And then Terrence Green was the 3. Tight end Drew Painter plays almost all the snaps too. He'll split a little bit with Zach Horton, but Painter's ahead of him, it looks like. These guys are all really affordable. We should probably be playing some James Madison guys. Thornton looks like the 1. Ravenel's the 2, at least by routes. And targets, he out-targeted Green 8-3. Very close between them on the year. Yeah, I'm going to play some James Madison. These guys are good price plays. Western Kentucky FAU, this team is underpriced. I saw Western Kentucky's prices already. 61 total here, 7.5-point spread. Western Kentucky 19th in pace. They have a 60.5% pass rate. FAU also 24th in pace. Very up-tempo game. Austin Reed's too cheap for his price tag. He should probably be the most expensive signal caller on the slate. He averages 320 yards through the air per game, and then he has 181 rush yards this year, so decent mobility. They didn't have Kai Robichaud last week, and it's probably going to be a committee regardless. Their run game hasn't had a lot of juice to it. Marquise Stepp is the Stoneman, but he's failed everywhere he's been in his career, and he's going to split with Irving Poindexter, Robichaud healthy, and LT Sanders. The receiving game is really where we want to look. We have plenty of price-adjusted plays here worthwhile. They run 4 wide almost every snap. Malachi Corley averages 8.9 targets per game, 87 yards. Dawood Davis averages 7.9 targets per game, 72 yards. Jalen Hall, 50.5 yards on 6.7 targets. and Michael Matheson, 46.5 yards on 5.5 targets. These guys are all live, and they're all good price-adjusted plays. If anything, Corley's a little too expensive. Now, he's the one, and he's a scary fade, but you can just save so much money going down from Corley. The routes, you basically have Corley, Davis, and Hall on the field every single snap. Matheson's about 60% route right here, so there's just a little drop-off to him. FAU, we've got N'Kosi Perry. This team is 24th in pace, 44.5% pass rate. Perry, somewhat mobile, 227 yards for him, averages 220 as a passer. I mean, you're just going up to play Reed at this price. Doesn't make a lot of sense to play N'Kosi Perry. Larry McCammon has a pseudo bell cow workload here. He's been very much ahead of Zaburi Mobley, averages 80 yards on the ground per game, another 10 through the air. He's a decent price-adjusted play here. I think not Mobley. I think McCammon is in play at 4,800 with a decent bell cow workload. The receiving game, it's LeJontay Wester, Jamal Edrin, and Jaquan Burton for the most part. On the year, Wester, 59.5 yards per game on 8.8 targets. Edrin, 52.5 yards per game on 6.3. Burton, he's at 44.5 on 4.8. Nobody else averages more than 2.2. Very little to see outside of that. These guys are somewhat interesting as GPP options just because it's so fast. It's a fast up-tempo game environment, 61 total. Edrin in particular is not expensive at 49. I think playing some FAU makes some sense here, especially on the opposite end of Western Kentucky. 2 games left. Louisville, Kentucky, 43.5 total, 2.5 point spread. Louisville, they're 61st in pace. They have a 44% pass rate, and Malik Cunningham is injured. He was called day-to-day. Essentially, the whole viability of this offense depends on him. If he's active, I think he's viable in tournaments. He's very cheap in this spot, and Kentucky's defense hasn't been great, especially against the run. And without him, we now saw the backfield kind of shift a little bit. Jawar Jordan, 16 carries. Tyon Evans only had 2. Maurice Turner had 15. I don't know if it was an injury for Tyon Evans, but they also haven't had Jalen Mitchell or Trevion Cooley recently. I'm going to pull up the DraftKings lobby for Louisville, see if there was an injury to Tyon Evans. Nothing listed. Maybe he got hurt. I don't know. I'll look. But this backfield's kind of a mess. Probably one just to stay away from, especially if Cunningham's back. In the receiving game, it's basically Tyler Hudson or pass at this point. 9.5 targets per game over the last 4. Amari Huggins-Bruce has been injured, so it's been very tough to play him. I'm going to look up his routes quickly because they ping-ponged a little bit all over the place with the injury rate for him. And he came in at 89%. It's pretty good, way up from the last 2 weeks. So Huggins-Bruce, only 3 targets, but this is going to depend on the status of Cunningham. I don't have any interest in either one of them if Cunningham's out. Brock Doman's not the dude. For Kentucky, Will Levis is playing hurt. He hasn't been able to run. He's a toe injury, among other injuries, only averaging 223 yards per game. Bad spot against Louisville. He's out of the picture. Chris Rodriguez is at a fantastic price. He's been in very tough games recently, and finally his price has come down. Averages 112 yards per game. Decent pass catcher, too. I think Rodriguez is completely fine. And in the receiving game, Tavian Robinson didn't see a target. I don't know if he didn't play or not. Did not see this game. He's not listed with an injury on DraftKings, which doesn't mean much, but Tavian Robinson did not see a target. Barian Brown had 12. Dane Key had 3. Those are the other receivers that play a lot for this team. And it hasn't really been condensed, or it has been really condensed. It hasn't really been a rotation at all. So I'm going to pull up Tavian Robinson quick. Again, normally I have this committed to memory. Yeah, Tavian Robinson played full snaps. He only played 5 fewer snaps than Barian Brown, but he didn't see a target. That's unbelievable, actually. But he's down in price. I think he'd be the guy you stack if you use Will Levis, which I am not going to do. Iowa State TCU. Another really big game, but totals at 47. It's really low. Iowa State's implied for 18.5 points. They have a 69th ranked pace, and they have a 57% pass rate. Decker's game manager extraordinaire. 73 rush yards in the year. At least it's not negative. And he does average 267 as a passer, which is decent. TCU's defense will definitely allow you to score, which they've struggled to do. They've had a lot of turnovers in Iowa State, so he's somewhat intriguing. Then in the run game, Jarrell Brock is out for the year, so they were using Cartevious Norton as a bell cow, and Eli Sanders hadn't touched the ball in 3 straight games, but he popped up for 12 last week. So the carries went 19 Norton, 12 Sanders, 1 Silas, which was shocking. I know a lot of the Norton rosters got vultured by Sanders. And at this point, it looks like it's going to be a committee to some degree. Norton still leads the way. He had 22 touches last week, but I don't feel as good about his volume. Hutchinson's a walking 100-yard bonus, 105.5 yards per game on 13.8 targets. He'll draw Hodges Tomlinson from TCU, who's an excellent corner, but Hutchinson is a massive height advantage. Plus, the volume's just going to get you there. He's fine. Jalen Noel and Demetrius Stanley are the wide receiver 2 and 3. I'm now seeing Demetrius Stanley only had 1 target last week. We're going to check why, because that is alarming. But generally, that's been the 3 wide receiver sets. And it was last week as well. It was still Stanley with 75% route rate, so I think he can be bought low at 3,800. Deshaun Hanika had a 70% route rate at tight end. Worked well ahead of Easton Dean and others. 5 targets as well. He's not the worst play. TCU, 82nd in pace, 46% pass rate, thereabouts. Max Duggan, 291 rush yards on the year, averages 260 as a passer. He's been playing hurt, but he's still very efficient. And their team total is decent at 28.5. He's playable. Kendry Miller got hurt. No idea if he plays. If he does, he's an excellent play. If he doesn't, Amari DeMarcado becomes much better. In the receiving game, Darius Davis didn't play. Quentin Johnson got hurt in the second quarter, didn't return. That would elevate Tay Barber and Savion Williams. If they both are back, it's going to be the 4-way rotation it's been all year. If they don't play, I would expect Blair Conwright to step up alongside Tay Barber, Savion Williams. They don't use the tight end a lot, so not worthwhile here. All are stackable at their prices because of TCU's efficiency. All right, guys, know that was a short show. Leave a comment. Let me know if I missed anything or if there's something you want to hear about. Again, watch live before lock. We'll have more information by then. Projections will be done. This is just a first look, if you will. But my name is Matt Gajeski on Twitter at Matt_Gajeski. Hit the thumbs up button on the way out. Otherwise, thank you for watching, and we will catch you again next time.